The British Army's values and standards as applicable to the man most likely to become our next Prime Minister. Courage. So this would be the bloke who manufactured a foreign trip so that he wouldn't actually have to be in the House of Commons on the day that it voted about the third runway at Heathrow, which he had, of course, vowed to lie down in front of a bulldozer to stop while seeking to become the MP for Uxbridge. That's the promise he made to his putative and now actual constituents. So you need courage. It's hard to know which story from the Boris Johnson back catalogue one should pick in order to demonstrate his absence of courage. He's got a touch of the Cowardly Lions about him, hasn't he, actually? But pre-Emerald City, when you sort of think about it, not just the hair. Discipline. I don't think even Boris Johnson's biggest fans would argue that he's possessed of even a scintilla of discipline. I know some of it's contrived. Jeremy Vine has told an astonishing story about how all of the apparent sort of befuddled nature is utterly contrived. And I know for a fact that he messes up his hair before going onto a stage. Most people tidy up their hair. These are the things I used to like about him. So discipline. Let's just, I'm afraid, mention Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Boris Johnson put his foot in his mouth while discussing the plight of a woman imprisoned in Iran. And as a result of his words, which were cited in an Iranian court while her sentence was being increased, that poor woman is now on hunger strike, as is her husband Richard. So there's Boris Johnson's discipline. The next one is absurd, really. Where do you begin to examine whether or not Boris Johnson upholds the British Army's value of respect for others? Respect for others. This is a man that went to court to keep the existence of his own daughter secret. He failed, of course. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to tell you about the existence of his own daughter, born as a result of one of his many, many affairs. Respect for others. If it doesn't extend to his own wife, it's unlikely to extend to you. Integrity. This, of course, is a man who agreed to help a former school friend from Eton have a journalist beaten up. That's about as far as his integrity goes. Loyalty? Loyalty. Boris Johnson and loyalty. Yes. Well, the long list of people that he's lied to in both his personal and his professional life is well established, so we'll let that pass. And finally, the British Army's value, selfless commitment. Selfless commitment, i.e. putting a cause or a shared interest ahead of one's own interests. Boris Johnson famously prepared 2 columns for the Daily Telegraph prior to jumping on the Brexit bandwagon, one of which explained why he would continue, as he had done for the rest of his political life, to support membership of the European Union, and one of which sought to explain why he was going to leave. That is pretty close to the polar opposite of selfless commitment. We move on to the standards that the British Army expects from all of its members, I think, not just the officers. Lawful. Well, we know that Vote Leave broke the law, and we know that Boris Johnson agreed to help Darius Guppy, now a convicted fraudster, break the law in the context of having a News of the World journalist tracked down and battered. So lawful, I'm afraid, doesn't even work for the man that we're about to usher into Downing Street. Acceptable behaviour is a very broad church, but I think all of the explanations above would probably constitute fairly compelling evidence that Boris Johnson is not a practitioner of what one might call acceptable behaviour. I mean, adultery is actually one of your 10 commandments. If you want to take even higher authority than the British Army's values and standards, you could go to the Old Testament. You could reach immediately for the 10 commandments. Acceptable behaviour and Boris Johnson, not phrases you often hear in the same sentence. And finally, professional. Well, again, tell that to Richard Ratcliffe and his daughter. Professional. Tell that to the women Johnson has abandoned. Tell that to, well, that's not fair, actually. That's not professional. So scratch that. That can go under acceptable behaviour or integrity or loyalty or selfless commitment or respect for others. But the Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe case tells you everything you need to know about his professionalism. Oh, and the recorded law breaking in the Vote Leave campaign, of which he was, of course, an integral part of the campaign. And he's going to be Prime Minister. And it's not just the figureheads, is it? It's the bystanders. It's like that Mark Field story. I'm as shocked or more shocked by the reactions of the people around him. As more footage and film emerges of that evening, there is actually one woman seeking to remonstrate with him from behind as he manhandles the peaceful female protester. But the other people at the table, they seem utterly unalarmed by the woman's presence, and that's because we now know they could see that the protest was unfolding in the room. They knew exactly what was happening, which is why they feared not a jot for their own safety or security. But none of them get up to try and stop him manhandling a woman either, which is incredible, really. The bystanders sometimes are more shocking than the protagonists. So that's why, after Bob Stewart and Johnny Mercer both cited their army service as somehow explaining their support for Boris Johnson, because I'm weird that way, just had a little look at the website about what there's something called the service test as well, but I'm not 100% clear on what that is, and I didn't want to explore my own ignorance live on the radio. The service test, I think, is a sort of moral code that officers or all soldiers are expected to follow. But there is the British Army's values and standards. Bob Stewart, one quick way of me assessing people is whether I would trust them with a platoon of 36 soldiers if they had to do an attack. I would argue, Bob, one quick way of assessing a person is see how they stand up to the British Army's own published values and standards. So once more with feeling, courage, discipline, respect for others, integrity, loyalty, selfless commitment, lawful, acceptable behaviour and professional. Boris Johnson, congratulations. You scored 0.